Record.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Jeff Adkins. I'm co-chair of the programming committee for PRSA Detroit. Thank you for joining today's live panel discussion with former journalists who have transitioned into the field of public relations. Panelists will discuss how their journalism background helped prepare them for the transition, some of the challenges of making the jump from journalism to PR, and lessons learned along the way. A few housekeeping items before we get going. Please drop your questions in the Q&A feature in the bottom of your screen throughout the program. We'll cover as many of those as possible at the end. We usually save about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. So if you got any along the way, just please go ahead and drop those down. And then secondly, as usual, we'll keep the Zoom open for a little while after the program, maybe 10, 15 minutes if anybody wants to stick around and do a little bit of casual networking with our panelists and moderator. So welcome to join for that. Before we get into our program, I'm going to read PRSA's antitrust statement. So we read this before all PRSA meetings and programs. PRSA's policy is to comply fully and strictly with all federal and state antitrust laws. Meetings and programs held under the auspices of PRSA must be conducted in a manner that avoids the fact or appearance of conduct that may violate the antitrust laws. Participants are not to discuss industry-wide or individual company prices, current or projected, or matters relating to pricing such as costs, profits, contractual terms and conditions like discounts, credit terms, wages, salaries, market allocation, market shares, sales, or clients' customers, or any competitively sensitive information. Compliance with the antitrust laws is a requirement for PRSA membership, and any responsibility for compliance rests with each member. Participants in PRSA meetings and programs have an obligation to terminate any discussion, seek legal counsel's advice, or if necessary, terminate any meeting if the discussion might be construed to raise any antitrust risks. It's my pleasure now to introduce today's moderator, Jeff Sell. Jeff Sell joined FleishmanHillard's Detroit office in August 2021 as an account supervisor, where he focuses on media relations work for automotive and B2B clients. He has a passion for telling stories about clients while continuously meeting and exceeding their expectations through creative and proactive thinking, productivity, and strategy. Before joining FleishmanHillard, Jeff spent nearly 3 years at Franco in Detroit, managing media relations, communications, and strategy for B2B, B2C, and nonprofit clients. A television news producer and executive news producer by trade, he spent nearly 6 years in newsrooms at WOOD TV8 in Grand Rapids, WXYZ in Detroit, and WWTV in Cadillac. Jeff has developed a niche for mastering media relations strategies by implementing the concepts he learned and the relationships he made in broadcast media during his time as an executive news producer and news producer. He attended Central Michigan University in Mount Pleasant and holds a Bachelor of Applied Arts degree in Broadcast and Cinematic Arts. He has minor degrees in journalism and sports studies. And with that, it's my pleasure now to hand this over to Jeff and get our program started. Jeff, take it away.
Thank you for that, Jeff. Appreciate it. I'm glad everyone could join our webinar today. Looking forward to it. So our three panelists that we have today, starting with Erika Erickson. She's a former reporter at Fox 2 Detroit, and she's the current Director of Communication at the Wayne County Sheriff's Office. She's a multi-Emmy nominated former market television reporter with a passion for excellent storytelling. She graduated from Wayne State University in 2009. She was a Journalism Graduate of the Year and was later honored in 2016 as its Journalism Alumni of the Year. She spent 3 years in Traverse City, Michigan, working as an anchor, reporter, producer, a videographer, and editor. She did it all at WBPN 7 and 4 News in Traverse City. She also worked as a DJ for a news talk and country station for 2 years. Her compassion, memorable presence, and contemporary reporting style quickly landed her back home in Detroit at Fox 2. She worked there for nearly 9 years as a reporter and fill-in anchor before leaving to be in her current role with the Wayne County Sheriff's Office as its Director of Communications. She has extensive expertise or enterprise abilities and has used her journalism and social media background to expand her presence and engage the public. She's a member of NAACP, a volunteer with Big Brothers Big Sisters, and loves to help out with Detroit Dog Rescue whenever she can. Our next panelist is Robert Huschka. He's the former executive editor at the Detroit Free Press and is the current VP of Education Strategies at the Association for Advancing Automation. Robert joined it's known as A3. He joined in 2017 and directs the team responsible for education initiatives, standards development, and certification programs. Before joining A3, he spent 25 years in journalism and served as the executive editor of the Detroit Free Press, where he led Michigan's largest, most influential newsroom. At E3, Robert currently leads research into emerging automotive technologies, such as artificial intelligence, 3D printing, 5G connectivity, and cloud robotics. He also serves as the liaison to the association's Artificial Intelligence Tech Strategy Board. Robert's team also curates the agendas for the association's industry-leading conferences, including the Automate Show, the Vision Show, and the Autonomous Mobile Robots and Logistics Conference. And lastly, we have Vickie Thomas. She's a former reporter at WWJ News Radio 950 and is the current director of communications for the city of Detroit and Mayor Mike Duggan's office. Mayor Mike Duggan appointed Vickie the communications director in May of 2021. She switched careers after signing off as the city beat and morning drive reporter for WWJ after an illustrious and award-winning 30-year career at Detroit's all-news radio station. She joined WWJ in 1991, previously was at WDET as a reporter and anchor for 3 years. Vickie made history as the first African-American woman in radio broadcasting to be inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame in April of 2019. She attended Michigan State University and graduated from Wayne State University, cum laude with an honors degree in broadcast journalism. The highlight of her academic career was as an intern in the office of Congressman Louis Stokes on Capitol Hill, where she is instrumental in getting commemorative legislation passed honoring Olympic gold medalist Jesse Owens. Throughout her radio career, she has earned awards from the Detroit Press Association, the Michigan Association of Broadcasters, the Michigan Associated Press, and the National Association of Black Journalists. She received the National Gabriel Award for the WWJ Black History Month series, The African American Church, the Heart and Soul of Metro Detroit's Black Community. Vickie served as Region 2 Director of the National Association of Black Journalists for 5 years. During her tenure on the national board, she led the effort to bring the organization's national convention to Detroit in 2018 and received the NABJ President's Award because of her efforts for that. Vickie is also a past president of the Detroit chapter of NABJ. She served as the vice president of the local chapter. She created a scholarship and internship program for college students interested in the field of broadcast news. Vickie also served as co-host of the Michigan Chronicle's Pancakes and Politics series for over a decade. Ooh, I caught my breath, everybody. That's oh man, okay. Well, there
I should have told you could have edited that down.
I just like how I got him to say that the Free Press was the Michigan's most influential news organization.
Right. I noticed
You had to
that.
swallow hard as he was saying that one.
Well, okay, I caught my breath for a second there. So with that introduction, we're going to kick off our event. So again, thank you all for joining us. We really, really appreciate it. And we're really looking forward to this event. So the first question we want to start with was, what are the biggest similarities between journalism and your current role in communications? How has your past experience in newsrooms helped give you a leg up? So with that, we wanted to kick it off to Robert and let him start.
Hey, first, just let me, thanks for letting us be here today, and I think you got a great group here that'll make me look good. So, the similarities ultimately get back to storytelling, right? What we ultimately all do is in all of our careers is tell stories. And, journalists sometimes think they have the market on that, right? That we're better at it. But I think that ability to take information, sort of reframe it and retell it in a way that's simple, easy, efficient to understand is really one of the strengths, I think, that former journalists bring to these particular fields. The ability to synthesize information in a way that makes it understandable. And that, to me, is one of the core elements, I think, of what makes journalists successful in careers even beyond PR. The ability to succinctly communicate is an underrated skill in the world today. And the ability to do that, I think, opens a lot of doors.
And I can chime in too. I mean, for similarities, man, the pace, the long hours, dealing with a whole lot of issues. When I was the morning drive reporter, I could turn probably 6 to 8 stories a day. Today, it's more like attending 6 to 8 meetings back to back. But in dealing with a variety of issues that affect the city in terms of messaging and one of my main duties is to continue to tell stories, which is one reason why I took the job when Mayor Mike Duggan offered it to me. We knew that, or he knew at that time, I didn't know that ARPA was coming. And he said, a lot of money will be coming to the city. We'll be able to really transform the lives of Detroiters. And with that ARPA money, that's exactly what's happening across the city. So I have the best of both worlds, and I'm loving it. I love making a difference and being able to tell residents about the stories or the programs and services that are available to them. I've done stories. One woman, she was homeless, pregnant, dealing with domestic violence. And through one of our programs, she was able to get housing, completely furnished, nursery for her baby. I told her about another program. She went through that program, found a job. Now she has a job making about $80,000 a year. So when you can make that kind of a difference in somebody's life, it's wow.
I think
It's
that's
just
amazing.
unbelievable. Yeah, it is. And that's one of the things I love about
I
this
think
job.
that a lot of the what we learn as journalists is dealing with people too, and a lot of different personalities. And I never realized I would be dealing, my job is a little strange. I deal with sometimes inmates directly who, I deal with people who are in jail, and they will email me and say, this is what's going on. And this is, sometimes, they're exaggerating, they're in jail, but sometimes they're not. And they need someone to listen. And I think that I learned a lot of compassion and a lot of just sometimes a lot of people that we interviewed, they just wanted someone to listen. And a lot of these people that, Robert and Vickie, that you guys deal with, and Jeff and everyone, that they just want to know that somebody cares, and they want to know that they feel heard. So I think a lot of the people that we deal with and a lot of the different personalities, that's been a huge, huge leg up that I've had in being a journalist and transitioning into PR, is just having that instinct of, okay, let's just practice listening. What do these people want? What do they need before we just go into PR mode?
Right.
And I know when, we talked before, we talked about when you're in journalism, and one of the biggest things that can carry over is giving that voice to the voiceless. Like, that was a big thing, and being able to share these stories in other ways that people might not be able to share them. So, as we talk about some of the differences and the similarities, Vickie, I wanted to go back to you. And since you made your current transition into PR, what's been the biggest challenge for you?
That's interesting. The pace is not the challenge, because I've always been high energy and could just pull out all the stops to get the job done. So that continues on in this job. Sometimes it's a challenge when we had the flooding, of course, and dealing with FEMA and making sure we had messages out in various languages so our residents would know how to access the funding and whatnot from FEMA and get assistance. So that isn't too bad. What I think was the biggest challenge, obviously as a reporter, you're just pretty much managing yourself. So when I sat down with the mayor for lunch to talk about the position, he said, well, by the time you leave, you'll be a great manager. And I shot back like, well, you know what? I know how to manage people as a result of my time on the national board of NABJ and as president of the Detroit chapter. I led a whole team that pulled off the convention when it came to Detroit, and those people didn't get paid. That's what I said, Mr. Mayor, they didn't get paid. So if the folks I'm gonna be managing are bringing in a paycheck, pretty nice paychecks, then I think I'll be able to handle it. But when I did start, that was a bit of a challenge because As I said, I'm high energy. I like to get things done. And I was driving really hard. And one thing that I didn't realize is that the team will take a little bit more time pushing out stories and whatnot. When I'm used to like 30 minutes, every 30 minutes, I got a different story rolling. Let's do this. Let's do this. But if you look at some of our content on our social media channels, you will see some amazing stories with drone footage. And so we found that balance. But at one point, I think they wanted to attempt a coup. but we found that nice balance. And I think keeping everybody motivated, keeping our eye on the prize, that our job really is to change the lives of Detroit residents, to lift them up and out of poverty in some cases, providing whatever they need, taking advantage of programs that we have for entrepreneurs. And so just being able to do that. But yeah, it was a bit of a challenge initially in terms of management. And I always said that, you know, when I got this job, I'm like, I'm going to be a better manager than my managers. And I actually told one of my managers that I think I'm a better manager than he is.
Oh,
I did.
I think there's that element of learning, you have more time than you used to have, right? Learning, sometimes you have more resources than you used to.
Right.
You're not necessarily, going it alone. I know I miss the cadence of it sometimes, the fact, especially in the newspaper business, where you had a product every morning you could point to, like, I made that, right? And you don't always have that.
That's a very good point.
You don't always
get to
have
see
that
right. Satisfaction of completing. Right. Yes.
Yeah, that sort of that finish line every day you sort of had built into your existence is something I certainly miss. I think the other problem journalists have is, what we talked about at the beginning. We want to make a difference. We want to be. Journalists have this thing where, we saw, it's a calling, right? We see ourselves as special, a sort of, maybe
there's like that little ego
order,
goes
right?
into play a little bit.
And you sort of have to, journalists, everyone looks at you when you leave the business like, oh, I'm sorry, what have you, you've gone over to the dark side. There's jokes about it, right?
Right.
You have to sort of, you have to reposition your place in the universe, even with your psyche a little bit, I think. And that's
really do. You have to tell yourself, I didn't fail at this. I'm just doing something else.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm still struggling with that a little bit. It's It's a really, really good point you just made.
Yeah,
I'm not sure I would go back though. I mean, and I'm not sure.
I know. It's tough.
I wouldn't go back.
It's like it's almost like a toxic relationship. You just
But you
don't want to let go of.
The transition really wasn't that tough. I mean, I really didn't even notice much of a transition. But yeah, I've gotten that a lot, Robert.
Yeah, I think you were luckier than a lot of us, I think, in that regard. I think, I think there's the moment where you just absorbing, right? At least I felt that way, where you're sitting and trying to listen, and you want to contribute so badly, but you have to be patient with yourself and sort of, the area I'm in is highly technical, a lot of jargon and terminology I'd never heard before. And you've got to give yourself permission to learn that stuff and take the time to absorb it.
Robert, you made a good point there, is that, I mean, when I made the transition, one of the biggest things that I saw right away is like, I would have never in my life thought that I'd be talking about X, name client, what they do, the services and that kind of things. So, that's been kind of one of the things that I've liked the most about my transition. But, Erika, I'll kick this over to you. Is, I know you talked about, being there for people and giving them a voice and things like that. But what are some of the other things that you really, really enjoy and like the most about your new role?
Well, I mean, let's be completely honest here. We had long days in news, and I was working out of a truck, and I was standing in sometimes 100-degree weather and sometimes negative 10-degree weather and sleet and rain. And sometimes I didn't know when I'd be home, if, I'd see my family. And I loved breaking news, but you never know how long your day is going to be. And I'd get phone calls constantly off the clock, 3 a.m., 5 a.m., confirm sources, to confirm information, call my sources, or messages from sources, things like that. So I don't get that anymore. I have a regular job, and it's a little crazy. I don't think I've had a regular job my whole life, because before news, I was in the service industry. So, you know how that goes. But I work in an office, and I have a little heater in my office, and I work regular hours, and some people leave at 4 because they come in at 8. Some people leave at 5 because they come in at 9. And I can make my own hours some days, and some days I can work from home, like today. And it's I'm still getting used to it. So I get holidays off. I schedule.
That may be one of the biggest, actually. The holidays.
Right.
It's like, wow, it's a holiday.
I forgot so much that I was scheduling meetings earlier this year, and I was getting calls, and people are like, I don't know if you're working that day, but I'm not, Erika. So, you have that day off, right? And I'm like, oh God, what holiday is it now? Because I was so used to it. So the work-life balance is priceless.
Imagine being with the city, though, because that period between, I didn't know what to do with myself.
The county is the same, Vickie.
Yeah, that period between Christmas and right into the new year. It's a couple weeks, like a 2.5 weeks. I'm like, wow. I mean, you still have to use your time. Like,
you're still checking emails and things
like that. But oh my gosh,
it's unbelievable.
Right. So
I can't describe it.
I'm loving that. And I don't miss getting up dark and early anymore either.
Exactly. Yes. You were up
early.
So early.
Morning drive. Yeah.
So the work-life balance and the mental health and the stress, I mean, that you cannot put a price on that.
Well, I still have the stress.
Well, I mean, it's stress. Yeah, it's different kind of stress.
Yeah, it's a different.
My day today is a little crazy. Not gonna lie.
There's nothing like a story exploding on you, right? And that adrenaline rush, and it takes you. I think it takes you years. I think to come out of that sort of, that crazed, anything can happen at any moment mentality that you come out of. We joked on.
We're a little addicted to it, weren't we? Maybe a little addicted to that, and I do find myself missing that. And like you said, that satisfaction of seeing kind of an end product, at the end of the day, you don't really get to see that satisfaction. Am I talking about dislikes now?
Well, no, I was just going to say
dislikes.
That was a perfect segue, because as we talk about again the similarities and things like that, and Vickie, you had mentioned that nothing really it all kind of seemed pretty seamless for you as you made the transition over. But I'm curious. Erika talked about it a little bit, but what do you miss the most about journalism and working in a newsroom and those kind of things?
I think the adrenaline rush and being able to make that difference for people, as Robert mentioned earlier. I mean, there were so many stories where, I gave voice to the voiceless. I remember one story I did about some folks that have mental health issues, and they weren't being treated fairly. The services were declining. And I found out that there was, in fact, an FBI, a federal investigation, and those people stood up, and they were not afraid to speak out, because in many instances, when people, they might tell you the problem, but they don't want to be the person out there doing the interview out of fear of backlash. But being able to tell stories like that, I mean, I kind of missed that a bit, the adrenaline rush of the breaking news. Like, there have been times where I thought, man, I wish I were there. And then there were times where I say, well, I'm glad I'm not there, depending on what it is. So I mean, it hasn't been too bad.
Yeah, that's not my problem.
And I miss the people too. I miss a lot of my
Agree.
colleagues. Yeah, because I mean, you're a family really when you're in the trenches, in the newsroom and whatnot. So I miss a lot of the people.
Yeah, I love watching the news sometimes now. Well, it's not my problem, you know.
I know. I'll watch and I'll critique, and
Yeah,
I'm sitting
good
there
luck with that.
critiquing, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, what am I doing? This isn't my problem.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. My wife is still a web editor at the Free Press, so I still get it sort of vicariously through her in the morning. So I get to feel some of that rush occasionally when something is breaking, and she's frenetic anyway. And I can just sort of sit back and smile and watch it happen. But you know, the other thing about the transition, right, is, you know, journalists are a contrarian bunch. We're righteous. You know, we've got our, you know, fist in the air activists to a certain extent, even though we try to remain neutral in these stories. And you know, there's still a part is, and there's not often that I come to sort of philosophical differences with my association, but there's moments where your views differ slightly from either your clients or your employers, or there are things you can't say, you know, just because of the position you're in, right? And that takes a little bit too. It's not insurmountable, but it's still turning the dials on your psyche a little bit to address that sort of, I used to be able to say anything and speak truth to the world, and now you choose your words much more carefully.
That is another thing, the word choice. I mean, usually you're used to writing just the way that you like to write, but now it's the nitpicking of each word is just, it's unbelievable.
The statements are very carefully scrutinized.
Yes.
Making sure every single which one, you know, and one of the other things that I noticed too is that I'm sure all of you realize that, you know, before you were emailing a person at X company and whatnot, be like, give me a statement. I've got a 5 p.m. news. I got to get this in the news. And you would, at least I would feel like you would get annoyed almost like you weren't getting a response, right? Now you're on the other side of this and you realize, okay, this has to go up to this person, up the chain of command. They have to confirm this and make sure everything's good to go. So, you know, I know that, you know, that's one of the biggest things that I noticed too.
I feel like half the day is just getting a hold of people.
Well, that's it. You mean when you were the editor of the Free Press, people took your calls. You know, I do miss or a news reporter or anybody. If you send an email, you typically got some sort of a response like, hey, I want to talk about X or talk about this. And now, without having the weight of a news organization behind your name, sometimes it's harder to get, you know, to get what you need out of X entity or X person, right?
A little bit different at the city. People typically respond. And then the other thing in terms of my job is as communications director, I work with John Roach, who is the media relations director, and his deputy is Corey McKissick, who came from Channel 4. So they still handle the daily media and responding to media requests and things like that. I'm doing it for Mac and all because I'll be the only one up there from the comm side. But so I really don't have to deal with that issue. Sometimes we have to maybe discuss messaging and tone and things like that. But that's one of the areas, and I'm happy about that too. But I mean, I deal with the media in terms of pitching some of our stories that we're doing internally, you know, to the media. So I deal with the media in that respect, but day-to-day media operations is still handled by John.
Okay. And we talked about just being from a newsroom, you know, having that closeness. And Robert, you had mentioned having that weight behind you. And I know we also talked, you would spend more time in a newsroom with your colleagues than your own family sometimes. Erika, you had said that too, but I'm interested to see or hear what you have to say, because as newsrooms across the country, you know, they're continuing to shrink. Journalists are, you know, being asked to do much more with much less. And you know what? They're thinking about making the switch from journalism over to PR. What advice would you give current journalists right now who might be thinking of making the switch?
And does that one go to me?
It does.
It does. Okay. Oh boy, I could talk about this one for a while. I think one of the biggest things, and Robert touched on this a little bit earlier, is, you know, just to keep thinking like it.
Uh-oh.
Always something when the camera explodes. Live
Oh my
television.
God. Hold on. Can you hear me?
We can hear
I
you.
can't
We
hear
can hear
you.
you, but we,
There
yeah,
you are,
there you
you're
go.
back.
Oh my
Cut the
God.
Did
feed.
you have
Cut the feed.
flashbacks to a live feed right there, Erika?
See, this is, there you go. I'm back. Wow, that was, I had issues with my first computer. I don't know what's going on today, but that's what happens. Hey, you work from home and then there you go. I was just going to say, you know, you got to keep thinking kind of like a journalist this whole time. And I feel like, because I was just dealing with the reporter just before I hopped on this call. And one of the things that I knew she wanted was an interview. And I knew her deadline was, you know, I knew she was fudging her deadline because she's in TV, you know, she's in TV, and that's what I did too. And because you want to get it done, and you got to get it on for the 5 o'clock news. So you got to just remember what you did as a journalist and keep thinking like a journalist. Do they have B-roll opportunities? Are they going to get the right sound that they want? Is this even a story? Don't pitch them stuff that is just going to be a waste of time, because they're not going to come out to the next thing. You know, you want to make sure that they're covering things that are worthwhile. And one of the things that I thought about when I was making the transition, one of my main reasons was I had some physical issues, and I wasn't really sure about leaving. And fact of the matter was, I didn't want to leave television. It was my passion, but my body was screaming at me and telling me, you can't continue like this. And this opportunity came along and it was perfect. So if you're even thinking about it, that is an answer right there, that something isn't right now. So whether it be your health, whether it be your financial situation, whether it be you're not seeing your family, whether it be maybe you're just stressed, or maybe you're just burnt out, or maybe just something isn't clicking. I just feel like you gotta just, if you have the thought is, I'm getting too deep, aren't I? If the thought is even there, then there's a reason. And I ignored that for a while. So I just want to make sure people who are even thinking about making the transition, just don't ignore it, explore it, and just keep thinking about PR. There's a lot of different ways, like Vickie, your job's very different than mine. Robert, your job's very different than mine.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways you can get into PR. It's not just working for a corporate, you know, a hospital, you know, for instance, you know, you can do a lot of different things.
Yeah, when
I do miss storytelling, but you know, maybe I can make a storytelling more part, you know, a part of the Wayne County Sheriff's Office.
Right. And I really wasn't even thinking about leaving until I got this certain call. So
exactly. Then you're like, wait.
I was thinking about, how am I going to celebrate 30 years, you know, at WWJ. And then it was nerve-wracking for me, because journalism, it was just like, that's what I did my whole life, 33 years. So and at my age, not that, you know, I'm old or anything, I'm youthful still.
You're 21.
I you know, I knew I questioned whether I had the energy to take on this role. Didn't question it too much, but you know, I knew it would be a lot. And I probably am working, I would say, twice as hard as I was working when I was at WWJ. I mean, I knew my stuff, you know, like the back of my hand, could do it in my sleep, you know what I'm saying? But the lack of resources was weighing on me. I don't know if one of the things you mentioned when you were reading the bio is that, you know, I fought to bring union representation at WWJ, and served as the shop steward.
So you didn't have a union over there?
Not when I first joined. Yeah.
Okay. Because I was lucky enough to have a union at Fox 2, thankfully.
Yeah, we are the same.
It was still
union,
bad.
SAG after. And yeah, even with the union, it was still bad. So I really feel for people working in some of these newsrooms, because they're cutting and asking people to do more with less, which puts more on your plate tensions flare. And like you were saying, the health issues could arise from that. A lot of people can't, I don't know how I can tolerate so much stress. It's just unbelievable to me. But
well, I mean, Vickie, being a veteran reporter, did you feel, and this is how I felt at Fox too, because believe it or not, I was becoming the veteran reporter after a while, they start to depend on you.
oh, right. Yeah, for
Because
sure.
they're bringing in newer, younger people and they need you, they
Coaching,
depend
yeah.
on you.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, the harder stories, the more difficult stories, okay, well, you
And-
got to do it. You got to do it.
Right,
We
and-
can't
and the
depend on that person. You got to do it.
And the
Here's the-
relationships too that you build over
And the
those
relationships, the
33
sources,
years. I
all
mean,
of that.
yeah, they still call me.
Same.
You have so-and-so's number.
Same.
You know, the advice, I mean, my past was a little bit different than yours, right? In that my company wanted me to move me to Indiana, and nobody wants to move to Indiana, right? So I suddenly found myself, you know, trying to execute a career change, right? And a lot of journalists, as the newsroom shrink, have found themselves in that position, right? Of being left without a seat on the merry-go-round, right? So journalists listening now, I would do some things, right? I would begin collecting data on what you do. Your newsroom is collecting a lot of data on you. Get numbers that can prove to future employers that you can deliver results. So begin collecting your skills. My resume was not at all equipped to go out into the real world. I learned after the fact that journalists they can write 100 things, they can't write a resume that will get them hired. I'm happy to. Yeah, I'm not looking for a job, but if anyone wants to reach on LinkedIn, and I can show you how I worked with a headhunter on my resume to really reorg it in a way for PR and comms jobs. So if anybody wants to reach out, I'm happy to share it just to sort of see the structure of it. Is very different probably than how your current resume is structured. Think about your skills and how they translate X for X, but do it. I would begin doing it now. If you're having the conversation in your head that Erika mentioned, the one where you're talking to yourself about this is what I really want to do, now is the time to begin collecting the materials that you'll need to be able to make your case to a future employer.
Right. And
Another thing-
the littlest things that you think of will translate.
Yeah.
The littlest.
Yeah.
You deal with people
Right.
every day. You interview people on their worst, sometimes the worst days of their lives. Sometimes you write things so fast that will work so well in PR. You know, sometimes you can format things that you didn't even realize, you know, your writing skills, that the style of writing that you didn't even realize. It's unbelievable how some of the things that we've all learned translate so quickly and so easily. Other things we have to learn, but those
Yeah.
things kind of just come.
Yeah,
So
another tip that I would give is just like continue to network. And, you know, obviously you're a member of PRSA, but just continue to get yourself out there. Reach out to someone. If there's someone that you think, well, wow, her job looks interesting, and it's then, you know, reach out to them and just say, hey, you know, can you tell me a little bit more about, you know, what you do, what it's like, how you like it? Because sometimes you think it might be greener on the other side, when in fact it may not be. So the more information you can gather, the better off you'll be in terms of making that decision, making the jump.
Well, that if there's anything to take away from this, I think those last 7 or 8 minutes was, I mean, those were great answers. Thank you all for that. Just want to address we've got some questions in the chat coming, so we will address those, everybody, in a couple minutes here. But as we kind of round out our panelist discussion here, wanted to get to 2 very quick questions about, first one being about, you know, the prevalence of misinformation out there. It's been huge the last couple of years. It's a real big concern. Vickie, what do you think the role of a PR practitioner, what is it when it comes to combating misinformation that's out there?
Well, number one, you have to come up with a strategy. And so one of the things that I've done here in my role, and it was something that the mayor, I mean, that's another thing about the job. He'll say, why don't you do this? I want this. And it's my job to implement it. And that's great. Like, I never knew that I would be doing things like this. For instance, coming up with the city's new emergency management system. Not sexy, but stood that up. And then also Rewards TV is a program that we have offering rewards for tips. So we do it in conjunction with Crime Stoppers, but it's not for an arrest. It's just for if their tip moves a case forward, if the detective just thinks it moves it forward, we pay out a tip. And we use Crime Stoppers because they're trusted, so they know it's not with the police. So stood that up. It's a DPD program, but it's up and running. It has been up and running for about 6 months now. But the other thing when it comes to misinformation, because I tell you that the one thing that really gets me, and I always knew that people within an administration worked hard, especially this administration. I just didn't know how hard. And when the mayor drives hard and you see all the other people at the table driving hard and pushing hard, you want to make sure we get a fair shot. So to combat misinformation, I started what's called a rapid response. So I've hired 2 people to handle that. They scour social media. They help people with constituent issues a lot of times, because it's more of that out there than the misinformation when it comes to Detroit. And then we'll challenge people and make sure that we put the facts out there. If they say, okay, well, Black developers aren't getting a shot, then we've got pieces that will go in news articles, and we attach all of those and put those out there to counter people. And in many instances, they'll back down. I mean, it's been unbelievable, but that's the biggest thing that we're doing when it comes to dealing with misinformation.
I wish I had 2 people who would do that.
No, you do, right? But I don't think the sheriff gets it as much as we do in the city, because
it's kind of just me, so it's a lot different. Everything. Yeah, you guys are huge. So,
Vickie, thank you for that. And just kind of rounding out here, I think we'd be remiss, obviously, if we didn't talk about the tragedy in Texas that happened on Tuesday, and just one of many, unfortunately. But Erika, I wanted to go back to you about this, because as all 3 of you know, actually, PR, as former journalists, we got flooded with emails in your inbox all the time, hundreds and hundreds, right? And wanted to just get your thoughts on, in light of any kind of tragic circumstance that happens, how do you think PR people can most effectively work with journalists together in these times of crises, and then come across as, or stop themselves from coming across as tone deaf? So if there's this big news that's happening, and they, for whatever reason, aren't reading the room, essentially, what do you think they can do to come across as not being tone deaf or out of touch with anything?
That's a good question, and it's hard. I mean, there's probably kind of a fine line. I think the biggest thing that a lot of us can really do is to just be sure to practice empathy every day, and remember that journalists aren't robots, and the stories that we're doing involve human beings and people's lives. And we just have to remind ourselves, just as we did as journalists, that yes, we have to separate ourselves, or we would have gone crazy. Some of the stories that we all covered were absolutely horrific.
Right.
I mean, we can probably all think of a few right off the bat.
Yes.
So we have to separate ourselves a little bit, but you also have to remember to practice compassion and empathy, and just remember that journalists aren't robots. The people that you're dealing with aren't robots, and they're all human beings. And just as I said before, listen to what they're saying, and not just, I don't mean pretend you're listening. Actually listen to what they're saying and take it in and respond to them as a human being, and be as transparent as possible without trying to just talk at them. I guess that's the best way I can put it. Just as you did as a journalist, and that's your edge again in this when it comes to these types of things. I think that when things like that happen, I think that's another opportunity for people in PR, that shouldn't be a problem. that's a way for you to, that's an opportunity for you to thrive in PR. And it sounds callous, but
maybe I think you're right. I think there's, in moments of crisis, right, is when you can really show your true colors, right?
yeah, exactly.
I think that's what the key is there, right? The other thing I would say though, in crisis, that you don't see enough of, is in a moment like this, also understand what all your parts and pieces are doing, right? How many times have we seen a really inappropriate social post that was probably posted 3 days ago that drops into your feed? One of the things I would always say to people is, stop. If a major crisis, if a major national news event like this happens, what do you have planned that might come off callous or not empathetic, right?
True.
Immediately step back and take inventory of what you're about, because that's again the difference in PR is you have all this stuff on the tracks and it's on these trains and it's moving out.
Yeah, it's all in the future. It's all planned.
Right.
And
so instantly going time out. Is there anything we're doing that is going to, step badly into this moment in time, right? I think a key question in a story like this, especially if you're, handling, brands or large scale companies who have so many moving parts on the tracks at any one time.
Yeah, in fact, Robert, with the Oxford shooting as well as this one, here at the city, we postponed some events just because it just would not look good to go forward with those events in light of what happened. So, and then I just think it's a matter of having conversations sometimes too, being straight up and having those conversations that you don't necessarily want to have, but could make a difference.
I agree. And it's one thing we're doing today with a reporter. We're talking about this. We're talking about Texas and we're talking about Oxford and some of the situations and what we can do better and what maybe we could have done better. And it's a conversation that we hope to keep having. It's not a fun conversation. Nobody wants to have it, but it's what needs to, Vickie said, it's what needs to be done. And I think that remaining transparent is number one.
Yeah, and I think it goes across really any line of whatever your job is in communications, whether you're working for a municipality, whether you're working for, a B2B, if you're working on the agency side and informing your clients and advising them, that's all really, really important. So with that being said, everybody, we do have about 11 minutes left. We've got quite a few questions that came up in the chat. So I did want to do our due diligence to answer these. So I'll just kind of say, rifle them off real quick, and then whoever wants to step in and answer that would probably work the best. First question we had, this is an interesting one. Do you foresee there being a problem in the future if there are too many PR comms professionals and not enough journalists?
Well, there's going to be less journalists. I mean, anyone who doesn't think that, I've got some property to sell them. It's covered in swamp.
Robert.
So the question then becomes, how is the world going to work with fewer journalists and more PR folks? I frequently say to businesses, you're going to have to learn how to tell your own stories. You're going to have to develop your own channels, and doing the work that you guys are doing, Vickie, at the city, where you're trying to tell some of the stories that the local media can never possibly get to because there aren't enough of them. It's not a knock on those organizations. They just are so stretched right now. It's not possible that they can tell all the stories out there. So PR people, and I saw one of the other questions in the chat is how do you pitch a story so a newsroom is going to run with it, right? You're
spoon feed it.
Yeah. Well, that's
exactly. You sometimes you have, but
that's what we do. We line up the interviews, tell them where to be, make sure they got the visuals, whatever they need. Yep. Spoon feed them.
And part of it's
all they have to do is show up.
Yeah. The flip side of that, though, too, is some people just aren't going to cover it. So you've got to figure out.
That's true.
Some of your stories are never going to elevate to the major news players in this city. So how do you then develop your own channels, your own audience, right? You need to, I mean, some of these brands and organizations need to become their own mini newsrooms. Again, much like Detroit has done with Vickie's role.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, for instance, I want to give you some analytics. We have at the city 46 social media channels, 46.
46.
Right. We have total social reach, 4.6 million people.
Wow.
So, you know, we're doing our own storytelling. And we have our chief storyteller, Erika Thomas. He deals more with the neighborhoods and people. We, with my Opportunity Rising stories, we deal more with the programs and services that residents can take advantage of. The mayor calls them Me Too stories. And so we focus on someone like the woman I told you about earlier who took advantage of a program and got housing through Community Health Corps, found a job through one of our other programs. So that person could see that story and say, wow, me too. She did it, me too, I can do it. So yeah, so that's one of the joys of my job. And I tell you, I was out there doing a lot of them myself, which I really enjoy, but with the other duties, with all the other departments, it's just kind of difficult. But when I get an opportunity to go out, I just love it. And they've taught me how to tell a story in a different way too. If you look at when I first started here, the stories I was pushing out, I was telling the story almost like a journalist, you know. I give myself more time to tell it, but with the way that we do it here, the creativity, I have a staff in media services of almost 40 people. I mean, videographers, photographers, drone operators. Some of these people are from the film industry. So they use drone footage. They just, I mean, these pieces sing. So I agree with Robert, a lot of these, and I think it's happening already. A lot of corporations are already doing it, bringing that kind of stuff in-house, telling their stories. So I think we'll see more of that. So that'll be a place where journalists can go.
Agreed. Just making
those skills and transfer easily.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say on sort of the same front on how to get a story covered, right, is take a larger look at the media landscape than what you've looked at, right? There are a lot of new players, especially in the Detroit space, Outlier / Detour being one, who are there to help you tell stories too, that into audiences we haven't always traditionally reached. So I would argue strongly to open up and take a larger look at the media landscape beyond just through traditional players. And that will help both of you. It'll help you guys get your story out and help those organizations grow. And we're going to need them as traditional legacy newsrooms continue to shrink.
So
that's a great point. That's a great point.
And, you know, when we talk about that ever important relationship, you know, the PR person and the journalist here, I had a question from Rachel. She wants to know, do you all formally email pitches to former colleagues, or do you call or text them a briefer ask to find out if they're interested in a story? So, you know,
yes,
Erika,
yes.
Use your sources.
Yeah, all of the above.
All the above, right.
Utilize the resources. There you go. All right.
And I mean, it helps, you know, it helps being in the media and as a leader in NABJ, having all those contacts, those media contacts, not just the reporters, but, you know, in a lot of cases, the managers and whatnot to say, look, you know, can you help us out with this story? And then it'll, you know, obviously give it a lot more credence coming from a manager to going to a reporter. But a lot of times the reporters will pick them up too.
Yeah. I always feel like I have to leap a tougher bar sometimes. Like, again, that journalism skepticism, like, I'm not going to do a friend a favor, you know. It's like you gotta jump through a larger hoop than before.
Got two more to answer here. So Megan Benelli, who's on our PRSA board here, she wants to know, what's the number one thing each of you, in your opinion, PR pros should know in order to be successful? Loaded question, but.
I mean, I think Erika has said it, so I'm going to steal it from her before she says it again, which is listen. From the moment you start, listen, absorb, understand the objectives and what success looks like for whatever organization you're supporting. Ask that question over and over again. What does success look like? What are we trying to accomplish? What are the core goals? You know, in journalism, the goal is to tell the story, right? The goals for your partners in the PR world may be a little different. What is the story trying to accomplish? What is the action you're trying to elicit? Understanding is really key, and listening and asking questions is really the key to that. Don't be afraid to ask questions constantly.
That's exactly what I was gonna say, because it's
Agree.
you know exactly what's expected, what they want, what the client wants. And so if I were doing it on the PR side with the client, with the mayor or the city being my client, I've had a couple of misfires just by not knowing exactly what he was looking for, right? So one of the things that we recently did was an overhaul of the whole, because I'm in charge of our website too, everything website. And we had to completely redo the website. The mayor said he wanted it to be the most transparent website, ARPA website in the country. And we are getting a lot of eyes on what we're doing with the ARPA and how we're standing up the programs. And so we had to completely redo it. And I enlisted one of my colleagues who works in the office of the chief financial officer, and asked her to lead that effort, knowing that I couldn't take that on. And she did a fantastic job. But like the first go round, though, what we presented, it was like just showed it to him. Nope. We weren't even close. But after having that conversation, oh, we nailed it, right? The next time around, we nailed it. But having had that information and really just asking the questions up front would have saved us a lot of time and energy.
I was just going to say, I've had to ask a lot of questions. I can't just wing things in this job. There's a lot of different things that have to be very exact. You can't just do things and think they're right. You have to ask, and you have to know exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing. So you can't, that's the biggest thing I've learned. I have to ask a lot of questions, and it might seem annoying at first, but be annoying.
Right.
Because you'd rather be right
than be annoying, right?
Yeah, you'd rather be right and annoying than screw something up.
We did have a former reporter, Scott Wolchek, who was at WNEM, is on there too. So Scott, it sounds like we kind of answered your question there about some of the most important things that we've learned here. I know we're just coming up on time right now, so we have two more questions to address, but I would want to bring it back to Jeff Adkins here to kind of wrap things up and see if those people would want to stay on afterwards and get their questions asked or answered.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, everybody. It's been a great conversation. Appreciate some really awesome perspectives here. As we mentioned, everyone, we're at time, but we're going to keep the line open for a few minutes afterwards, so please feel free to hang around. I will promote anybody who stays in as an attendee over to panelists, so you'll be able to chat and do some informal networking. So with that,
Jeff, if I could just do one quick plug for my association. We're doing our giant trade association here in Detroit on June 6th. It's the largest trade show of the robotics and automation industries. If anyone who wants any information on it, hit me up. You may be representing many of the companies involved. It's we're taking over Huntington Place here with about 250,000 square feet of exhibit space. So we're really excited to bring this event back to Detroit after more than 20 years in Chicago. So there's my shameless plug for.
Awesome.
And I have one too, since he had the opportunity, I'm going to take it. I'm helping a friend who's looking for a junior level PR person. So if you know of someone, please let me know. My email, I can put it in the chat, but it's very simple. Vickie, VICKIE .Thomas@DetroitMI.gov.
And I'm also interviewing interns right now, if anyone knows anyone.
Hey, that's good. That's what these things are for. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording, and I'll move anybody over who sticks around. Thanks, everyone.